Wolf Theiss Soundshot. Insights and analysis from one of the leading law firms in Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe. Welcome to a new episode of the Wolf Theiss Soundshot, Change and Recovery in Central and Eastern Europe edition. In this episode, partners Ileana Glodeanu and Richard Clegg discuss how businesses in the region adapted in 2020 and the positive prospects for the year ahead. Optimistic in their outlook, Richard and Ileana frame the growth potential of the region in terms larger than the pandemic, and instead see it as part of an upward trend that began decades ago and continues to accelerate despite current events. Ileana is a partner at Wolf Theiss and has particular focus on energy, TMT, and pharma. Based in Romania, she has advised on some of the largest transactions in the country in recent years and has extensive knowledge of business opportunities in Southeastern Europe. Richard Clegg is also a partner and is a transactional and regulatory lawyer working throughout the region. Based in Bulgaria, he has a particular specialisation in structuring and negotiating projects across the regulated sectors. His experience includes advising on internationally significant infrastructure, telecom, energy, and technology transactions.
Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's the start of spring here in CEE. And so Ileana and I today will be talking about some of the lessons learned from what was a very strange year for all of us and all of our clients. And then perhaps more importantly, looking forward to what we see as quite a nice environment for the region. So kicking off, Ileana, last year, very difficult. I think it was a crash course for many companies. Lessons learnt, perhaps just to ask you what you saw, some of the game changes that took place and how you saw companies in the region dealing with the situation.
Hi, everyone. Indeed, Richard, our CE region is a region of game changers, of outside the box thinkers. And that is because the region, I guess, is best equipped to face challenges. So historically, CE has been a region where people are resilient. We learn to adapt, we learn to be agile, we learn to be creative. So that actually allowed for intense business transformation. That has been the case, of course, at global level, but also for our region, we've seen, 2-year plans becoming a 2-month plan, which of course allowed, for example, entrepreneurs to blossom. So CE is actually a region which abounds in examples of those looking beyond their core businesses to create value, of entrepreneurs who reinvented themselves and who had the courage to take tough decisions. So I always give the example of one of our M&A clients who's leading Romanian furniture and textile products manufacturing group. They've decided to capitalize on their textile expertise, and they launched mass production of protective masks and other medical personal protective equipment. And that was, of course, in order to offset the potential downturn in the furniture industry. But I have to say that is just one of many examples of outside the box thinkers in our region. And at the other end of the rainbow, as opposed to entrepreneurs, it was also funds and let's say bold deal makers that use this opportunity to earn high returns and to get ahead of the curve. And I guess, Richard, you've seen quite a lot of these, and you've seen the same with private equity funds and venture capital funds in our region.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, CEE generally in the last 12, 18 months has seen more venture capital coming in. And I think this is a bit of a difference to what we've had over the last decade. So, of course, after the changes, you get that first privatisation wave and the larger private equity. But over the last couple of years, we've really seen lots of entrepreneurship in the region and new venture capital funds coming in at that young startup Series A level. And I think all of us last year in March sat back and thought, well, will this continue? What is going to happen? Will some of that capital find different places in, say, Germany? But I think on the contrary, we've seen a real uptick in these venture capital funding all across CEE. And even though the data is young, I mean, some of the data coming out for 2020 shows that actually venture capital funding almost doubled in a number of areas. Particularly technology-related industries, of course. And we also saw lots of new venture capital funds coming. And what's been quite interesting is that the original VC funds were very much getting their cash and capital from this European Investment Fund, but now quite a few are in their second, some even now raising funds for the third fund. And we're seeing much more private capital. And this is very attractive because I think what you see is that even during last year's situation, there is private wealth in the region willing to put its money into venture capital funds. And of course, this is then this virtuous circle because we see that entrepreneurs can access and can grow. And so I think, all of this has been very positive situation. And it's not only technology, it's also, healthcare, clean energy, all of the future tech industries, which, hopefully will help the region grow.
Okay, so Richard, are we talking about risk management rather than risk avoidance, which have actually been the fast failures and learnings from the last 12 months in our region?
I think we've seen, generally lots of transactions being led by sort of digitalisation. Not only the software companies, but also larger manufacturing deals have been led by rationalisation, digitalisation of these manufacturing lines, led by Internet of Things, led by new communications, automation. I think what was quite interesting was that at the start of the crisis last year, lots of companies, of course, looked at their employment situation, did the analysis, whether that might be rationalized. But then I think generally what we saw is that the companies made the investments into sort of digitalization, but did not reduce employment. I mean, there were slightly different types of jobs there. And, I think this is a positive for the region. It shows that there's lots of talent here. Not only in the bigger cities, but also for the manufacturing places in the sort of smaller towns. And I think companies really made a commitment to the region rather than just looking for that short-term result. We've also seen a lot more US investment, and obviously CEE can attract investment from all over: Russia, Turkey, Middle East, Western Europe, US, and it waxes and wanes as the years and the macro situation develops. But last year, I think, saw much more US investment into the region, which is very positive. Not only because US investment is normally smart money, it is coming together with know-how, it's coming together with technology, it's coming together with the international trade knowledge, but also because it gives the people, the young workers in the region, access to that global thinking, which is extremely positive. I know that you, Ileana, work a lot with the larger blue chips, and I'd be interested to know whether my experience sort of reflects yours as well.
Yeah, Richard, it's exactly the same. Actually, we had a great time working with regular blue chip clients last year, and actually interesting learnings as well. So, for example, we started working with a big client on a large gaming transaction, is somewhere in the range of hundreds of millions euro. This was last spring. Then that transaction was put on hold, and we resumed, due diligence and actually transactional work in September last year, and now we're waiting to close the transaction next week. So, in terms of learnings, for example, working with big clients was that slow is better than fast. So, they took additional time into transaction, and big clients plan for logistical challenges and also other disruptions, which were presented, for example, by travel restrictions, and that was governed by an inability to meet in person for management presentation or to conduct site visits. It was also difficult to conduct the actual due diligences, and moreover, in some transactions, we have to say we faced delayed regulatory filings. So I think this was good to a certain extent because it allowed parties to get to know each other better and to enhance cooperation and to develop synergies. But yet, let's say one takeaway from last year was that it is good to build in additional time in some transactions. And funny enough, we don't have that time in tech deals. So that time was one important learning for the period. And I think in terms of, again, failures and also learnings, in several deals, deals, we've seen that thinking about long term is not the right way to do it. So actually, founders, entrepreneurs who focused on short term and took short term decisions actually were successful. For example, we have several clients who are retailers and were supposed to launch orders for Christmas in March last year. So they said, well, forget about Christmas. We cancel Christmas this year. We will, just think about now. So actually, agile companies were able to focus more on present, to take swift decisions, to integrate with other retailers for deliveries, to think more about e-commerce, who are able to move stocks from one city or one warehouse to another, etc. Those companies were those successful ones. And I guess also another learning for this period of time was that actually we learned to be more sophisticated. We learned to build in complex structures. Half of our deals had some form of deferred consideration, and when I mention that is all form of earnouts, reinvestments, rollovers, etc. And I have to say that founders who would never accept an earnout without a minimum floor, they been through change of mind, and they decided, okay, fine, I'll sign the transaction like that. And we've seen more and more deals built on lockbox mechanisms, including with equity tickers. So, well, by the way, equity tickers means that sellers will benefit from cash profits generated between the lockbox date and completion. So that's, I guess, some of the learnings we've picked up from the region. But can we then say, Richard, is C back on the radar? And if so, why is that?
It's quite interesting listening to you there, Ileana, talking about timing for the transactions. And several months ago, I saw some data about M&A transactions and how long they took. And in the 1980s, before technology, the typical transaction took about 2 or 3 months. And I think we all appreciate that it hasn't got shorter as the years go by. But I think CEE. I've always been very positive about the region. I mean, I've worked in the region for coming on 15, 20 years, and at the moment, I think there's some very nice tailwinds, really helping the region. We've touched on a few. We touched on trade. There's been quite a lot of sort of foreign sort of direct investment over the last 5 years, and fortunately that did not stop during the crisis. I think to the contrary, manufacturers realised that having their sort of production facilities closer to market was advantageous. And again, looking at some of the early data, we see really in most of the major manufacturing sectors, automotive, OEMs, the sort of petrochemical, pharma industries, there was an uptick in the sort of foreign direct investment during 2020. Of course, that's tempered slightly by some of the foreign direct investment limitations that EU countries, including CEE, started to put in place to allow regulatory oversight for sales of companies within its sort of strategic sectors. But again, touching on for the US, I think that's also the opportunity for Western European companies, US, and certainly we've seen lots of foreign direct investment coming from Italy, Germany, France, good Western European companies into the region. Another very interesting macro theme, also perhaps helped by the crisis, is talent. And of course, 1989, 1990, after the changes, Eastern Europe suffered a loss of talent as people went to the United States for university or went to the UK and Germany. And once there, they obtained jobs in those countries. And really, that was a sort of loss of really smart people. It has changed. And certainly last year, I think we've seen quite a few people coming back. We, as a law firm, have also benefited from that. And I think if you look at our sort of recruits during 2020, you see lots of people coming back from the UK, France, very, very talented lawyers, which of course now will hopefully make their career within the region. But not only legal services, we've talked about venture capital. Lots of the entrepreneurs are sort of people who have had some experience abroad, and they've come back with ideas, with contacts, with internationalism, and they're starting to build businesses. On the flip side of that, the people with the money, we've talked about the venture capital, and lots of the founders of these new venture capital firms are also coming back into the region from overseas, and they've had experience in the US, in the UK. And venture capital is a very different form of investment to private equity and to private investment. So private equity, private investment is largely about having some control, having a board seat, really being a sort of industry partner. Venture capital is much more focused upon giving the company the sort of tools, i.e. the capital to grow, and really looking after the value rather than necessarily being too closely involved in the sort of business. There's more trust perhaps in the sort of founders. So I think we're seeing general macro benefits, and we're seeing CEE almost back on the radar screen as a positive place to be. And I think that gives us a lot of opportunities if we look out short term during 2021. And I see now quite a nice pipeline of sort of deals. And I think that's the same for you as well, Ileana.
Yeah, I guess the acceleration of the trend towards digitalization actually is driving tech deals in our region to the top. As local leaders of international clients, we're first to know about the tech unrest and the developments in our part of the world. I guess the crisis has rendered obvious, if not already clear from before, that all companies today are or must be digital. So intangible assets are a critical vehicle for realization of value. And luckily for us, C enjoys a wealth of tech companies which can serve either as targets or service providers to targets. And despite the slowdown, we continue to sign and close transactions for the past 12 months. And I think as advisors who are active in the region, we have a role to actually put together sellers and buyers. And for example, in several of our jurisdictions, we have created deal logs, and we do have lists of viable targets and who would be suitable, and what that actually allows us to contribute to deal making. And I think we are aware of opportunities in our region, and we are aware of businesses having good foundations and led by powerful leaders. And therefore, these are M&A champions that we're trying to promote and to stand nearby. And I guess in addition to those, I could also emphasize that another opportunity is actually this, let's say, trend, which I think it ties in with what you just said, Richard, regarding the trades and return of talent. There is a trend of relocation of product sites in the CE, and the redesign of the supply chain, which comes closer to European markets. So it's some form of nearshoring. And I think that's another opportunity to note for us. And I think it definitely puts CE in the spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And we're now seeing quite a nice sort of situation where you have the young companies coming up, which we've really focused on for this podcast. But also, you just touched on, we're 30 years after the changes, and lots of the companies which were founded in the early 90s are now really of a very sort of significant size, and they are sort of national champions with a very good market share within the region. And they've also started to now look out for transactions, for deals, for joint ventures internationally. I think one of the nice things about our firm, and I sort of know that you do it as well, is really helping founders and entrepreneurs look at their business which they've grown, and helping them to sort of decide what's the best strategy. Is it to grow sort of laterally? Is it to expand into new markets? Is it to bring in smaller partners, or is it to sell a larger stake, or even to sell completely? This is something that we do, and we enjoy. And looking forward, I think for those people listening to this, you can sense quite a lot of optimism from both Ileana and me for the future of the region. I mean, hopefully we will not be in lockdown too much longer. We'll see what happens there. But broadly speaking, transactions business is generally doing reasonably well. There are opportunities both for international companies looking at the region for inbound investment, and there's also opportunities for the CEE companies looking outbound internationally. And both of us, plus all of our other partners in the firm, very much look forward to helping businesses in the next year or so. And I think with that, we're coming to the end of the podcast. And on behalf of us, or both of us, just to say, thank you very much for listening today. And we hope that you have found it so interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Wolf Theiss Soundshot. For more information, you can contact us via email at soundshot@wolftheiss.com or visit our website at www.wolftheiss.com. You can also follow us here to receive further updates on developments in law and business from one of the leading law firms in Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe.